Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 324 of my modded Factorio playthrough. In the last episode, we finished up with most of our tier 2 and 3 ingots, but the last thing we need to work on is our tungsten, which is patiently waiting for us to do something with it. But before I get to that, I kind of want to cover some housekeeping things. And one thing I've recently done is I played through vanilla Factorio just to experience the game again. It felt very foreign to me, but still fun. One thing I noticed is there's a big difference between the energy consumption penalties between Bob's and vanilla. Where in Bob's, the speed modules essentially give you free energy. So if you look at the bottom here and look at the stats, where on speed module 5 you get a 100% bonus to speed, but only a 50% increase in energy consumption. In other words, it saves you energy, so it's kind of a no-brainer. And no-brainer things in video games, I feel, is bad design or bad balance. There should be pros and cons to things. And in vanilla Factorio, I don't exactly remember the numbers, but you actually spend more energy consumption than you get back in speed, so you pay an energy cost in order to do that. And we can kind of adjust these Bob modules a little bit. So it's kind of hard. We need to go into the main menu, but if you look at speed module 1, it has an energy consumption increase of 10%. And then efficiency module is minus 10%. Productivity is plus 10%. So we kind of need to remember that. It's plus 10%. So we come in here, go to the mod settings, and it's on startup, so I'm going to have to restart for this. Go down to Bob's modules, and you can adjust the bonus per tier. And it's kind of not clear, because you would hope that it would say, hey, for this module, change it by this much, but it really doesn't. It's kind of unified. So you see these are all the numbers, and they're essentially percents. And the two of them that are 10%, which is the thing we want to change, is up here, module consumption bonus per tier and module consumption penalty per tier. So I think what that means is that's energy consumption right there. So the bonus, it says bonus, but it's actually less energy consumption, but that's probably for the energy efficiency modules. So we don't want to change that, but we do want to change the energy consumption tier. And as far as what to set it to, the vanilla speed modules are not consistent with each other. Where Module 1 gives you a speed bonus of 20% and an energy consumption increase of 50%. So, in other words, the energy consumption goes way higher than the speed bonus. Where Module 2 is 30% bonus with a 60% energy consumption, so it's basically doubled there. And then with Module 3, it's 50 and 70. So in other words, it gets a little better every time, but even speed Module 3s, the best ones, still consume more power than they give you in speed. So when trying to figure out what number to use, I figured I would just use module 2 because it seems like having a consumption that goes up twice as fast as the boost in speed seems to be pretty balanced. And if you look at module speed bonus per tier here is 20%, and if you remember on the numbers, that's kind of what it was. So for the energy consumption to be double the speed bonus, we need to make this number double. So in other words, for every 20% increase in speed, there will be a 40% increase in energy consumption. So we can save these settings, and I have to restart, and then we'll see what it does. All right, we're back in. Let's stand over the pad to charge the batteries. But now we look at the modules, and we can see what happened. Where the speed bonus is the same of 20%, but now we have an energy consumption boost of 40%. So this is the same as speed module 2's in vanilla. And every tier adds on to that. So you see tier 5 gets a 100% bonus in speed, but a 200% increase in energy consumption. So now, to make your setup smaller, it's going to cost electricity, and this seems a lot more fair. It didn't change the efficiency module because we didn't change that setting. But because they're all kind of linked together, and it's kind of weird like that, that this actually increases the energy consumption of productivity modules too. So now, just like speeds increase energy by 40%, each productivity module increases by 40%. So now our productivity module 5s also have a 200% increase in energy consumption and a 45% decrease in speed, and that 75% increase in pollution, all to get 25% productivity. And considering how OP productivity modules are in this game, I think that's a fair trade. That seems pretty balanced. So what this is going to mean is it's going to dramatically increase our factory's energy consumption, because pretty much every machine in the entire factory uses either a speed or a productivity module. Certainly, when you look at the setups we just worked on, every single one of these is stacked with speed modules, so this is going to have a dramatic impact on our energy consumption. Our factory is pretty quiet right now, so there's not much to see, and in fact, the biggest energy consumer is actually our logistics zones, which is funny. And the second one are those signal transmitters, so those are certainly starting to add up. It's actually kind of big, but our factory's been very quiet. I've been making small changes and fixing small things on the factory, so there's not much to really see. But I have the feeling when it starts going, that's going to have a huge impact on energy consumption, and that's going to push us closer and closer to nuclear, which is why I want to do it. Because I have the sneaking suspicion that those speed modules that were increasing our energy efficiency basically made our farming setup a little better than it really should have, because I'm surprised we've been able to last this long with a factory this big, and it's essentially being fed by this. Like, really, this and a little bit of this processing here powers the entire factory, and it's infinite and repeatable. So that seems a little broken. But nonetheless, we're not quite there to start on nuclear just yet, because our residuals are still there, but I'm thinking that working on uranium is pretty close, because we need to do our tungsten, which would naturally be the next thing right here, and then we would have to do uranium, and we're making it right here, so it makes sense to process it close to here as well. I am kind of worried about this setup making lime, but it's specifically there to make lime, make glass, so it very easily can be anywhere. It doesn't have to be there, it could be anywhere we want it to be. So we still have basically this space. Obviously we can't go over the coal mine without having to put a train in here, and I see no reason to go over the mine. But we have a little bit of space, and we can use that. So I'm thinking the first one will be the tungsten, and then we can work on that uranium. When the actual reactors go online, I can't say for sure, because I'll still want to go through all these residuals first. But there's a couple other things to cover here. So let's fly down to the science setup. One thing that was recently updated was Science Cost Tweaker. So if you have been interested in that mod, but you didn't want to get into it because of all the bugs that it has, well, they have now been fixed. So it was the first update in like 2 years or something like that. I was giving up hope that it would ever be fixed, but now it is. So you should be able to just use Science Cost Tweaker with the other mods that I'm using and not have to really mess with anything. Although it still gives you all of these byproducts, which essentially generate ores. So I'm probably going to switch that back to where I had it before, where it was 20 ores instead of 2 to give you ores back, because with productivity modules, this will actually generate resources. So I'll probably need to fix that. But that's just a balance thing. That won't break the game or anything. But probably the biggest thing you would want to worry about if you've already been using it is they changed the way that blue science works. It still works the same as far as the setup, but it's a lot simpler. Where you notice there's only 2 inputs now, the femto laser array and the atomic sensors array. But you see we're putting more stuff into here, where we are inserting sodium hydroxide in here, and we are putting these in as well. And you can see that you can't even select them anymore, which are the sulfur light source. So now the sulfur light sources are made in assembling machines. But nonetheless, it doesn't matter in the sense of this setup, because you don't need them for the science anymore. The thing that they go into are the lab optics and analyzers, which just goes into the labs. So now you don't need these anymore. I already went through the effort of building it, and it doesn't hurt anything to have these in here. But now you don't need all those resources anymore, so blue science is a little simpler. So luckily I don't have to change anything really. But one thing I am curious about is if that's going to change the balance of how all of these resources are created, specifically the naphtha and the fuel oil. So for now, I've disconnected the fuel oil to see what happens to it. And also I've stopped delivering the oil residuals into this warehouse to pick them up, because I kind of want to see what happens from here. But we're probably not going to be doing any significant research for a while, so we won't really be able to check it, so I hope I remember. Another thing that I've noticed is our gas bus is essentially out of chlorine, and that's not something we'd want to see. It's normal for oxygen to get low because it's being treated like a byproduct, and it's normally at 0 or close to 0, but chlorine shouldn't. Chlorine should be regularly supplied to the factory, so it's very odd that it's got 4 units in there. So something is not right. So flying down to our chlorine processing area here where we were working on salt earlier. We long since disconnected this from making sodium hydroxide because we had so much salt in our factory that we were testing to see if we can supply ourselves with just salt, and clearly we have, because our factory's been fine without this connected. But we are out of the chlorine, which actually kind of makes sense because in general our factory only supplies chlorine from this area, and right now the only time we make it is when we are electrolyzing the salt into sodium hydroxide, which creates chlorine. But what that means is if we have a process that needs chlorine but not sodium hydroxide, that we won't be getting it. And if we go to our setups, titanium requires chlorine but not sodium hydroxide, and you can see it's empty because it's the thing that drained us. So this is a good example of why you don't remove setups because you think you don't need them, because you still might. So as it turns out, we still need this setup here specifically to make chlorine, but we may not need the whole thing, because this whole thing was built to make the sodium hydroxide. And I have added some steam turbines in here to help out with the hydrogen. It seems like the factory has burned through it just fine, but also this is probably the biggest source of hydrogen, at least by volume when it's running, so it makes sense that it's here. But we kind of need to hook this thing back up. We already have the chlorine vents, so we don't really need to worry about that, and we don't need the hydrogen vents either. So we can pull all of this out. And we probably don't even need this tank because this is the thing that is controlling it now. It looks like we have a setting here that is looking to see if sodium hydroxide is low or if chlorine is low. So it's already trying to turn on. So what that means is we probably don't want this warehouse filled to 80,000 because there won't be much room for more sodium hydroxide now. So I probably want to set that back down. I think I set it so high just to try to use up all the salt, but it hasn't helped because we still have maximum salt. But if that's set to 10,000, let's drop this to, how about 40? So they certainly won't turn on because this is at 80. But these should. We want to make sure all these pipes are hooked up to the right things. Right now they have all been disconnected. We have our hydrogen here, but it's going into this tank, but we don't want to because this is the burn everything away tank. So we want to hook it up on that side, which is the factory side. Although, if the factory is very full, because of sloshing, it might be difficult for this setup to run efficiently. So, let's put a buffer tank in here with a pump to try to push it out, just to make sure it can properly run. I guess this would be a good test considering our factory is so low on the chlorine, but so high on everything else. Well, like before, when you want to test something, just unhook it and see what happens, because we now have a saline water generator that's going to use up all of this salt that we've been collecting, specifically getting rid of saline water. So this will make sure that we always have it to electrolyze. So I don't see the need to have these here right now, so we'll unhook it just to see how the factory operates. So the last thing we need to do here is pipe the chlorine back into where it needs to go. It looks like this is where the old pipe was. So we can just put it in there, and yeah, it's connected and flowing a little bit, so in goes the sodium hydroxide, which should clear these out and let them start running again. And it's pushing the hydrogen into the factory. And you can see how it's basically maxing these pipes out. So it's going to have to slosh all the way down. And now that it has sloshed to where the sensor is on the other side of the factory, this pump is now allowed to turn on, and it's going to slowly burn the hydrogen away. It looks like I did upgrade them to the better versions. So we've got turbines, we've got the heat source 2s. So this is the best version of the setup that we can do. So we're getting maximum efficiency out of it. But you can see that chlorine is very quickly increasing. And did this completely fill up? No. It's using that tank as the control. We would want to use this tank right here. So let's unhook this for a second. Put it back on. Is this set to anythings? No, because we can't have it set to anything with all of this going on here, because the wires would cross. Let's say chlorine is, I think 15,000 would be the 20% mark here. You can see how quickly that level's going down now that we're not running it anymore. Send a green light. So we get a green light from being low on the sodium hydroxide, below 10,000, and we get a green light for being low on the chlorine. And this belt will run if either of them are low. And since the other one used some green wires, I guess I'll use them too and try my best not to cross things, although it's looking really kind of messy in here. But there we go. It's hooked up. Belt wants to move again. We don't really need this tank here. It's mainly there for throughput, so let's just get rid of it and hook the pipe up without it. I hear flow. Pipes look good. Turbines are running. And this actually makes all of these setups turn on, which isn't something I'd want. I'm curious if only the one will work. So let's unhook saline water and regular water from all of these, and it's kind of tricky. But we'll pull it out of there, pull it out of there, because I want to see what the performance would be on all of these. Because one set can actually produce 342 a second, which seems like a lot, and these would consume less. So I'm guessing the one setup is going to be more than enough. It would be nice though just to upgrade the machines, because why not? We're already here. Whenever you take a look at a setup is the perfect opportunity to upgrade it. And one inserter does 3.64 and these do 1.8, so upgrading the machines isn't going to put a limit on the inserters. But you see it's doing good again and filling up, so we'll just have to see if the one setup will work, and if it doesn't, we'll start hooking up the other ones again. And it's funny, they're all running their hydrogen burners as well, but those burners are not connected to the main system. They are only connected to these setups, so that's not something we need to really worry about. And speaking of hydrogen burners, our hydrogen generator, that used to be our oxygen generator until we converted it, seems like it's been supplying the factory just fine. And I'm pretty sure the rest of these setups have been disconnected, or at least some of them. Yeah, that one and that one. But you see they're all basically empty, so I'm thinking we could probably just get by with this one right here, and all of this other stuff is just extra. So this is always kind of fun and always kind of scary, where you need to pull this stuff out without breaking something. It's kind of hard to figure it out, but because you see that pipe goes straight through. But it looks like it doesn't matter, it's just connected to that other setup anyway, but that setup actually needs that to go through in order to connect to the factory. So we'll have to remember that. So it's always kind of tricky, but can we see it on Pipe Visualizer? Yes. I don't know how to remove them. On one hand, I just want to pick them up by hand. But also, on the other hand, this is Factorio, and that's not how you do things, so guess we'll just pick all this up and see what's left over when everything's said and done. Luckily, all our factory bots are upgraded now, so they are quite quick. So we don't need that. We don't need any of this either. And now we're back to the first setup again. It's so much simpler now, removing all of this. Yeah, it does seem like water kind of does pass through here, but we can do like water pump jacks now to make this a lot easier. Yeah, we had so much that I think we had 2 belts of slag. That is almost certainly not going to be the case anymore. So let's remove one. Which one makes the most sense? Probably makes sense to pull this one. Which leaves us with just this, and let's just put some red belts in here because who knows how fast this is going to end up being. Probably reasonably fast once it has a bunch of speed modules and whatnot. So without going too crazy, let's try to make some upgrades here for this specific setup. We want to go to chemical plant 2 to 4. Honestly, the yellow inserters will probably be fine. Water plant 2 to 3. And let's just say anything yellow belt to red belt, because that kind of makes sense. So upgrade all of this. Cover all the belts. I kind of do want to wait for the robots to get here because I want to put the modules in. Well, luckily, they're quite quick. Right on cue. For the chemical plant, well, actually, probably don't even really need to do that because I imagine we probably can't put productivities in any of this now. So, just speeds, and I wonder what that's going to do to the energy consumption of these machines. Now that we have changed the settings. What does it consume? Well, that's not too bad. Only 2.25 megawatts per machine. So that's a lot of megawatts out of not very many machines, but should be good. And we did pick up a couple of those used electrolyzers, so we can throw that in there. And it looks like we also got some in the junk warehouse. Oh, look at all those bronze pipes. Let's see. Honestly, we could probably just do a buffer chest right here. And just ask for the used electrodes. And yep, they're getting called in here. They'll get thrown into this system and then just be in this buffer chest. And get taken care of. Alright, that covers most of the things that I can think of that were kind of needing some attention. Well, residuals continue to go down, but it's not critical yet. So, I think we are at the point where we can work on some titanium. So let's fly up there. I believe that was the last resource that we needed to work on. At least to turn into ingots. We certainly would need to turn everything into coil form after this. But for now, we can do tungsten. I think we placed that there just to line everything up. So, let's cover tungsten here. The tungsten ore goes in, and hydrogen chloride gas. So it's a good thing we fixed that setup. And we get calcium chloride and the tungstic acid. That acid turns into tungsten oxide. It's interesting, it does that while adding nothing. And we get purified water out of it, which we could electrolyze away. And then the tungsten oxide and hydrogen fluoride gas gives us the tungsten hexafluoride gas. And then finally we get powder and some fluorite, where we can either put the powder in and some carbon to get the tungsten carbide plates, or just do the tungsten oxide without having it in powder form. And that would save us the hydrogen fluoride gas. So it saves the setup a little bit of work, but it's kind of weird how it's just easier. I almost wonder if we're probably going to want to have it in powder form. So in fact, we can check this. We do need to add the tungsten powder with the cobalt powder in order to make the tungsten powder mixture, which is a part of making it into the plates. So for ease of use, I'm kind of thinking, since everything else needs powder, we probably should just make the tungsten carbide out of powder as well, even though it's going to consume a little bit more resources. Just because it seems like the tungsten powder is the thing we're going to be busing, because we can't even make it into ingots to begin with, so it's going to be the thing that's on the bus, so we might as well use the powder. And we could also make the copper tungsten plates, which is going to be a little weird, but we mix the powder with the plate. There's certainly nothing stopping us from making a specific setup. that can do that. So for now, I'm thinking our goal is the tungsten powder, because it's that powder that gets mixed with other things to make what we want. And like making the tungsten plates, we require the powder mixture, and then that mixture requires cobalt and tungsten, but cobalt will be in ingot form, and any of these ingots can be ground down into powder. So we can leave cobalt in ingot form and just crush it into powder when we need it, but tungsten will stay in powder form the entire time. Got to make sure we get the correct goal here, and that would be the tungsten powder, which is made in a blast furnace. We'll just set it to the wood bricks. Might as well make that the default. The tungsten hexafluoride gas out of a liquefier. That's the correct tier. The tungsten oxide from tungstic acid, which comes from the ore, and it looks like another liquefier. We'll just say 60 because that's what everything else runs at. Eventually, we'll be able to put out the ore at this rate. But for now, we can't, but everything else was set to that rate, so why not set this one too? And actually, to make this smaller, we can just get rid of the logistics row because we don't really use this for figuring that out anymore. Use the rate calculator. It's much more accurate for figuring out how many inserters you need. So there's the process. We can slam some speed modules. Oh, come on. Not quite enough there. And now these efficiency modules suddenly are a lot more valuable because of how much energy these use. So before we were like, oh, we only need a few of these to get it down to minimum. Well, that's not the case anymore, because even putting 2 of these in here, we're still at plus 300%. So I think I'm going to start using those efficiency modules again. And this one, that last module does help. And here it kind of does. It still says 2, but it might work a little better if it's slightly under 2, because the other machines are that way as well. So far we're looking like direct insertion between those 3 rows of machines, which is pretty cool. So can we do the same with this? Oh yes, we can. In fact, we can go much slower, but we don't really need to. We just need to kind of get it within the same range of the other ones. And the efficiencies do help there. So that's actually really fascinating, where we have 2 machines into 2, into 2, into 2. So we can basically make a straight line, and since these are fed by 2 belts, it's basically 1 belt into each line of machines. So that's pretty cool. And that's the end of this episode. On the next one, we are going to build and test our tungsten setup. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later.